Tonight, in a warm, softly lit pharmacy at the close of a quiet evening, where dark wooden shelves hold amber glass bottles beneath the faint antiseptic clean hum of fluorescent light, and a small handwritten formulary ledger rests open on the counter, the dark side of pain relief begins with one odd and irresistible fact. A plain white tablet in a modern bathroom cabinet may still be carrying the distant chemical echo of a bitter willow drink poured in Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago. Welcome back if this little night room is familiar to you, and a soft hello if you have only just found it. Tell me where you are and what time it is for you, if you feel like it. It might be a quiet bedroom in Toronto, a humid midnight in Manila, or a rainy hour somewhere far away. And I read every comment. If you would like more of these slow walks through strange corners of history, you can like and subscribe, and then let the next one find you easily. Have you ever taken a painkiller almost without thinking, and then wondered how something so ordinary learned to hush one of the oldest alarms the body has? So the shelves draw a little closer now. The air smells of paper labels, old wood, clean metal, and that sharp medicinal note that clings softly to glass. At the counter, someone is already sliding a blister pack beside the open ledger, as if the whole long ladder from the gentlest syrup to the drugs measured in micrograms has been quietly waiting here all evening. Pain is not the enemy, at least not at first. Pain is a message. It is one of the body's oldest ways of saying that something needs care. A hot pan, a twisted ankle, a throbbing tooth, a fevered head, a joint that has done too much on a damp day. Each one is slightly different, but the body files them under one large and urgent category. Something is wrong here. Please pay attention. That is the basic problem with pain relief, and it is also the reason it exists. Pain is useful, and pain is miserable, and those two facts have had to share a room for as long as people have had bodies. A signal can save a hand from a fire. A signal can also keep a person awake all night. A signal can make rest impossible, food unappealing, and a simple walk to the sink feel longer than a voyage. So the human project of dulling pain began very early. It began before chemistry had clean names. It began before anyone spoke of receptors, enzymes, nerve endings, or electrical messages. It began when somebody chewed a plant, slept after a poppy brew, pressed a cool mud paste to a temple, or learned by hard repetition which bark was worth the bitterness. Even now, in a very modern home, the medicine cabinet is an accidental little museum of that long search. There may be a bottle of paracetamol or acetaminophen, depending on which label the region prefers. There may be ibuprofen in a cheerful box that makes it seem almost as harmless as mints. There may be aspirin that has sat so long in the cupboard that the tablets smell faintly sour through the lid. There may be a numbing gel with a name that sounds sleek and scientific. There may be left-behind tablets from a dental visit, folded into a paper packet and forgotten beside cotton swabs. There may be nothing grand at all, just one half-used blister strip that has survived 3 moves and a deep clean. All of it is history with child-proof caps. Tonight, the walk is a slow one. It begins with familiar tablets that people take while making tea or answering emails. It ends much farther up the scale, where some drugs are so powerful that the dose is counted in tiny grains and careful decimals. Between those ends lies almost the full story of how people have tried to quiet pain. Some painkillers work near the place that hurts. Some work in the blood and tissues around it. Some act on the nerves that carry the message. Some change the way the brain receives it. Some create numbness. Some reduce heat and swelling. Some wrap the whole signal in a heavy blanket. And some open a door that is far more dangerous than it first appears. We will come to that door later tonight. For now, it is enough to know that not all relief is built the same way. 2 medicines may both make a headache smaller, and yet one may leave almost no craving behind, while another can teach the body and mind to ask for it again. That difference matters more than most labels suggest. Pain itself begins in a surprisingly plain way. Tiny watchful nerve endings sit in skin, joints, muscles, teeth, and organs. They do not think in words, but they are very good at noticing trouble. Too much heat, too much pressure, a torn edge, a chemical burst from irritated tissue, a stretch that went farther than intended. When enough of those warnings collect, a message moves inward. It travels along nerves toward the spinal cord, then the signal climbs to the brain, where it is sorted, colored, and given meaning. The body may tense, the hand may pull away, the face may tighten even before the mind finishes naming what happened. Pain is not just sensation, it is sensation plus interpretation. That is why a scraped knee, a migraine, and an aching tooth can all feel like different kinds of weather. The body is reporting damage or strain, but the brain is also deciding how urgent, how local, how lasting, and how impossible to ignore the signal should feel. This is clever. It is also exhausting. A body without pain would be in constant quiet danger. Small injuries would pass unnoticed. Joints would be overused. Burns would deepen. A fever might sit for too long without sending its unpleasant little memo. But a body with too much pain is trapped by its own alarm system. It cannot rest properly. It cannot heal comfortably. It may become cautious, sleepless, short-tempered, and worn thin by a signal that no longer helps as much as it harms. So medicine has always tried to bargain with the alarm, not to erase it entirely in every case, not to make the body foolish, just to turn the volume down enough that sleep is possible, breathing is easier, movement returns, and the day can proceed without every nerve behaving like an overexcited town crier. That bargain is harder than it sounds. Silence the signal too little, and life narrows around the pain. Silence it too much, and the body may lose useful warnings. Pick the wrong drug, and the stomach complains, the liver protests, the kidneys sulk, the blood thins, the mouth goes numb, or the mind begins to like the medicine, for reasons beyond the original ache. Labels tend to keep these truths in very small print. The oldest written pain remedies feel oddly familiar once the names are stripped of age. People wanted something for headaches, something for sore joints, something to help after hard work, childbirth, fever, or the plain bad luck of having teeth and bones. Ancient Mesopotamia had willow, not the neat coated tablet version, not the friendly pharmacy version that sits beside tissues and thermometer batteries. This was bark, steeped or chewed, bitter enough to make gratitude a mixed emotion. It was, in a sense, ancient Mesopotamia's answer to not having a pharmacist on every corner. Those who tried it were not enjoying a modern customer experience. Willow bark tea seems to have been reviewed somewhat poorly by anyone who preferred pain relief not to taste like wet tree. Still, people kept turning to it, which usually means it did something worth repeating. The useful part in willow is a compound related to salicin. Much later, chemistry would take that family line and refine it into something more stable, more convenient, and much easier to swallow with dignity. That line eventually leads toward aspirin, though the path is long and full of clever adjustments. The first willow users did not know any of that. They only knew patterns. They knew that certain brews eased fever a little. They knew that some aches softened. They knew that the relief was not magical and not always complete, but real enough to be passed from one generation to the next, in the practical voice of household advice. Take this. It helps some. That sentence may be the oldest form of pharmacology. Ancient Egypt had another answer, and it was a very different one. There, the opium poppy entered human pain relief with a softness that would later prove costly. The plant's dried latex could bring sleepiness, calm, and a heavy drifting distance from discomfort. For someone with severe pain, that must have felt less like a treatment and more like an unexpected mercy. Again, the first users did not know the chemistry. They did not speak of alkaloids with tidy modern precision. They knew the plant by what it did. It eased. It slowed. It wrapped rough edges in cloth. It made the body feel farther away from its own complaints. And that is where the history of pain relief begins to divide. Willow mainly belongs to one tradition. It helps by changing the chemistry around pain and inflammation. The poppy belongs to another tradition. It reaches into a deeper place where the signal itself and the feeling attached to it can be altered more powerfully. We will not name that place yet. It is the doorway we will find later tonight. That doorway is one reason the history of pain relief never stays simple for long. If willow is the ancestor of many familiar non-opioid medicines, then the poppy is the ancestor of a much more double-edged family. One branch leads to needed hospital drugs, surgical relief, and mercy in severe pain. Another leads toward tolerance, dependence, and a long human habit of underestimating what repeated relief can teach a body to want. This is not a moral story. It is a chemical one. Bodies adapt, brains learn, relief is remembered. That remembering is where dependence enters the room. Dependence is often spoken of as if it were one thing. It is actually more like two close relatives who wear similar coats and cause endless confusion at family gatherings. One is physical dependence. The other is psychological dependence. They can arrive together, but they are not the same guest. Physical dependence means the body has adjusted to a drug being present. It has changed its own balance around that regular visitor. If the drug stops suddenly, the body notices, and it may complain until it finds a new balance again. That complaint can range from mild to serious. Depending on the drug and the dose, it can mean aches, restlessness, sweating, stomach upset, shakiness, poor sleep, low mood, or a general sense that the body has mislaid an important piece of furniture. None of that automatically means a person misused the medicine. It can happen after proper medical use. The body is not making a moral judgment, it is doing chemistry. Psychological dependence is different, though it can overlap. This is the felt pull toward a drug because of what it does for mood, stress, fear, routine, identity, or comfort. A tablet may come to mean safety. A syrup may begin to mean sleep. A certain capsule may become not just help for pain, but help for the whole weight of the day. That is a subtler hook. A person can miss the calm, the float, the ritual, or the promise of relief long before the body shows obvious withdrawal. Someone may think constantly about the next dose, guard it, plan around it, or feel strangely unfinished without it, even when the original injury has faded. Again, chemistry and experience are working together. This is one reason pain relief is never only about pain. A medicine may reduce inflammation in a swollen joint. That is straightforward enough. But another medicine may reduce pain while also giving warmth, sedation, reassurance, distance, or a soft-edged sense that everything will be fine for a while. The more extra gifts a drug brings, the more carefully it must be treated. This does not mean every strong painkiller turns every patient into a tragic ballad. Real life is quieter than that. Many people use powerful medicines briefly, carefully, and with good results. Many others taper off without drama and return the bottle with half the tablets still rattling inside. The danger is not theatrical, it is ordinary. It lives in repeated use. It lives in rising tolerance. It lives in the sly little shift from I need this for the pain to I feel wrong without it. It lives in brains that are very good at turning relief into preference and preference into routine. Routine is underrated as a historical force. It builds habits. It shapes commerce. It turns plants into industries and soothing syrups into household names. It lets an evening tablet feel as normal as brushing teeth, even when the chemistry inside it would astonish a shepherd from ancient Egypt. The modern medicine cabinet is therefore not just a storage place. It is an archive with very poor filing habits. There is the oldest branch, with Willow's descendants in cleaner modern forms. There is aspirin, which became famous not only for pain, but for fever and inflammation and later for other careful medical uses, that Gerald, the aspirin apologist, would certainly overstate if he were here tonight. He is not on duty in this chapter, which may be for the best. There are the newer anti-inflammatory medicines, such as ibuprofen and naproxen. These belong to a large group often called NSAIDs. The full name is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which is accurate and not especially cozy. They mainly work by blocking the body's production of prostaglandins, which help create inflammation, fever, and pain. In simple terms, they turn down some of the chemical fuss around an irritated place. That can be very useful for sore joints, strained muscles, feverish aches, dental pain, menstrual pain, and the dull after effects of having lived inside a spine all day. They are common because they work well for many ordinary problems. Their risk, however, is not usually dependence. Their risks live elsewhere. The stomach lining notices them. The kidneys notice them. Bleeding can be affected. The label knows all this perfectly well, and yet people still imagine that familiar means simple. Familiar often only means well marketed. Then there is paracetamol, also called acetaminophen. It is one of the most ordinary pills on earth. It is tucked into drawers, glove compartments, office kitchens, first aid boxes, and almost every family cupboard that has ever also contained a thermometer with fading batteries. It lowers pain and fever, though it does very little for inflammation. It is so common that people forget it is still a precise chemical tool. Its mechanism is less tidy to explain than its popularity suggests, but it acts largely in the central nervous system, rather than out in inflamed tissues. It does not usually irritate the stomach the way many NSAIDs can. It also does not create the kind of dependence linked to the dangerous doorway waiting later in our tour. Yet even this mild friend is not infinitely forgiving. The liver keeps score in stern silence. A bottle can look harmless while still requiring exact respect, which is one of the oldest themes in medicine and one of the least popular. The same story repeats across the shelves. A medicine can be mild in one way and risky in another. A drug can be strong in relieving pain, but weak in creating craving. Another can be extraordinary at dulling suffering, and also extraordinarily good at teaching the nervous system to expect it. Strength and danger are related, but they are not twins. A cream that numbs a patch of skin has one kind of power. A tablet that lowers fever has another. A hospital injection that can quiet severe pain after surgery sits farther up the ladder. A synthetic drug measured in micrograms sits on a rung so high that dose and disaster may be separated by figures too small to feel with the eye. That is why tonight's ranking has to be patient. If all painkillers are thrown into one basket, they blur into the same cheerful idea of relief. But a children's syrup, a topical lidocaine patch, an aspirin, a morphine injection, a treatment medicine like methadone, and a fentanyl dose are not merely stronger versions of one another. They are different strategies with different costs. One lowers chemical messengers. One numbs a local nerve from sending its signal at all. One changes central processing. One enters that deeper doorway and tells the whole system that pain, reward, calm, and breathing should all be negotiated on new terms. The body notices every one of those bargains. This is part of why old remedies and modern drugs can feel strangely related. Willow bark and aspirin belong to one family of logic. The plant was rough, variable, and bitter. The tablet is measured, clean, and convenient. But both are trying to influence the same broad world of inflammatory signaling. Opium and morphine share a similar family likeness. One came from a plant and centuries of practical use. The other arrived through isolation, purification, standardization, and the sober confidence of laboratory medicine. But both touch that deeper system that can make pain feel not only smaller, but farther away. The farther away part is where history grows complicated. People do not only want less pain, they also want less fear, less tension, less insomnia, less dread of the next wave, and less sense of being trapped in a body making unreasonable demands. A drug that offers only pain relief is useful. A drug that offers comfort as a bonus is far more memorable. Memory is very persuasive inside the nervous system. This is why certain medicines become beloved with alarming speed, not because people are weak, and not because history forgot to read the warning label, but because relief that comes with calm can feel like being forgiven by one's own body. There were whole ages that leaned hard on such bargains. Laudanum, for example, was the Victorian era's original all-purpose wellness supplement, with considerably worse long-term consequences than anything currently sold at a farmer's market. It was used for pain, cough, nerves, sleep, fretful babies, unhappy moods, and likely any afternoon that needed muting. It worked often enough to become ordinary, and ordinary is the most dangerous costume a powerful drug can wear. That pattern repeats in modern times with different packaging and more polished fonts. The 1990s OxyContin marketing campaign was, in its own smooth way, the original influencer push for a lifestyle product nobody needed to adopt, backed by medical literature that turned out to have been written rather optimistically. History loves a neat label and a hopeful brochure. Still, it would be too simple to sneer at the past. People in pain have always been making practical choices with the tools available. A mother in Mesopotamia did not reject willow because the taste lacked elegance. An Egyptian healer did not dismiss poppy because receptor theory was underdeveloped. A 20th century patient did not read every paper behind a prescription ad. Most people trusted the hand offering help. That is another quiet theme in this story. Pain creates urgency. Urgency shrinks attention. When something hurts, especially after hours of not sleeping well, a bottle on a shelf starts to glow with the promise of normal life returning. Few people greet that promise by requesting a seminar. They swallow first. They read later, if at all. And yet there is something almost tender in the way medicine tries. A coated tablet is designed to slide down neatly. A cap is made easy for tired hands but hard for children. Flavors are added so syrup does not taste like punishment. Doses are printed in cheerful colors as if the chemistry inside were not serious enough to change organs, moods, habits, and nights of sleep. The modern package speaks in a very soothing voice. Take with food. Do not exceed. Use only as directed. Ask a doctor if symptoms persist. It sounds less like a command and more like a polite hotel note about towels. Behind that tone lies a vast amount of hard knowledge. Every common painkiller represents centuries of guesswork becoming measurement. Plants were chewed, extracts were concentrated, molecules were identified, doses were standardized, side effects were argued over in journals and discovered again in kitchens. Then the result was placed beside toothpaste. So yes, the home medicine shelf is an archive. A crinkled foil strip carries the idea that chemistry can be portioned into little silver windows. A child-proof bottle carries the idea that danger may look very tidy. A cotton wad in the neck of a jar carries the idea that medicines deserve small rituals of care, even when they are cheap and common. Even the chalky dust at the bottom of a bottle tells a story. It says people trust solids. It says measured doses feel safer than brews, leaves, gums, sticky pastes. It says modern life prefers relief that can be dry, shelf-stable, and swallowed with tap water while standing in socks under a dim bathroom bulb. There is nothing ancient-looking about that scene, and yet it is ancient in spirit. Someone hurts. Someone wants the hurting to stop. Someone reaches for the best thing available, with half a hope that the body can be reasoned with. 4,000 years pass, and the gesture barely changes. Only the chemistry becomes more exact, and sometimes more dangerous. It may help to think of pain relief as a ladder with many side rails. The lowest rungs include things that are familiar, legal, often safe when used properly, and not especially tempting to the brain's reward systems. Higher rungs include drugs that still have clear medical uses, but carry more cost. Some costs are to the stomach, liver, kidneys, or blood. Some are to alertness. Some are to breathing. Some are to the habit-forming parts of the nervous system. And some costs are hidden until routine makes them visible. This is why tonight cannot simply be a list of strongest to weakest. Strength is not only about how much pain disappears. A medicine can be weak for severe injury and still very risky in overdose. Another can be extremely strong in a hospital setting and still appropriate in careful hands. One can be safe for short use and troublesome for long use. Another can be poor at causing dependence, yet dangerous to the liver in silence. The shelf is organized more neatly than the truth. So we move slowly. We begin with the painkiller many people took without thinking. The one pulled from a drawer during a headache. The one swallowed after gardening, after a dental visit, after a long flight, after a day of staring at a bright screen and pretending the neck is not attached to the shoulders. That ordinary choice deserves more respect than it gets. Because once the ordinary pill is understood, the rest of the ladder starts to make sense. The big divide in pain medicine is not just stronger and weaker. It is also whether a drug mainly works around the body's pain chemistry, or whether it enters that deeper doorway tied to reward, relief, and dependence. That doorway remains closed for a little longer. Before we reach it, there is value in lingering by the lower shelves. Here sit the medicines that rarely inspire poetry. No one writes a moody diary entry about standard dose ibuprofen. No one frames an old blister strip of paracetamol as a family heirloom. These are tools, plain and practical, which is exactly why people can forget they are still powerful. Practical things are often underestimated. A kettle can scald. A ladder can slip. A common tablet can quietly irritate a stomach, stress a liver, or interfere with blood clotting. The danger is not melodrama. It is the sleepy confidence of familiarity. The past had this confidence too. The first person who kept willow bark near the cooking pots was not thinking about receptor selectivity. The household that stored poppy preparations was not building a theory of dependence. They were solving tonight's problem with what worked yesterday. Medicine often begins there and only later becomes science. Then the science arrives with scales and names and little glass bottles. Now the pharmacy shelf glows softly in the half-light. Amber glass throws warm color onto the dark wood. Typed labels sit beside handwritten notes. A ledger waits open, as if every dose ever measured has left a faint ghost line on the page. Even here, the old and new still share a counter. A sleek foil packet lies beside a spoon used for syrup. Capsules sit near a mortar that looks older than the building itself. Fluorescent light hums overhead, while the room still keeps the manners of an old apothecary. It is somewhere between Victorian caution and hospital efficiency. pain relief has always lived in that in-between place. Part household habit, part laboratory triumph, part gentle care, part trouble waiting quietly in a drawer. That quiet trouble is why dependence needs one more careful look before we go on. Physical dependence, to repeat softly, is what happens when the body adjusts. It is an adaptation. If a medicine acts on the nervous system again and again, the body may change receptor numbers, neurotransmitter release, hormone responses, or general equilibrium to match, and the body feels suddenly underfurnished. Psychological dependence is not located in one tidy place. It grows from memory, expectation, fear of pain returning, relief from distress, and the comforting rhythm of having an answer nearby. A pill can become part object and part promise. The promise is often harder to surrender than the object. This distinction matters because many arguments about drugs blur it. A patient may be physically dependent after long-term proper treatment and still not be chasing a feeling. Another person may have strong psychological attachment to a medication with only mild physical withdrawal. Both situations are real, and neither is improved by simplistic slogans. The nervous system dislikes simplistic slogans anyway. It prefers details. It notices how fast a drug reaches the brain. It notices whether the medicine brings euphoria, sedation, numbness, warmth, or emotional distance. It notices how sharply the effect rises and how abruptly it falls. It notices whether relief is linked to a pleasant mood shift or merely to less throbbing in a swollen joint. The more pleasure or comfort rides along with pain relief, the more caution is needed. This is not because comfort is suspicious. Comfort is lovely. Sleep is lovely. Calm is lovely. The body is naturally drawn toward anything that offers those gifts during suffering. But chemistry can turn lovely things into repeat requests, and some drugs are particularly persuasive. We will later meet treatment medicines that occupy the same dangerous doorway in a steadier, longer, more controlled way. Those medicines are used not to create delight, but to reduce chaos and help people step back from it. They belong in this history too, because pain relief and dependence treatment are closer cousins than many people assume. The shelves know this, even if the labels do not socialize much. At the far end of the scale wait the ultra-potent synthetics. These are the compounds measured not in generous spoonfuls or ordinary milligrams, but in whispers of quantity, micrograms, tiny deliberate amounts, a few grains, one might say, though modern pharmacists would prefer more exact terms and less poetic thumb-pinching. When the dose is that small, precision becomes a moral virtue and a practical necessity. Yet even these drugs descend from the same human wish that shaped willow tea. Please let this hurt less. That continuity is what makes the subject so strangely intimate. The shelf in a modern apartment and the basket of remedies in an ancient home are not separated by as much as they seem. They are separated by knowledge, purity, manufacturing, and law. They are joined by aching bodies and tired nights have always made relief attractive. A headache at 2 a.m. does not care much about historical context. A cramping muscle after work is not especially interested in the evolution of medicinal plants. Pain narrows time. It makes now feel larger than later, so people reach for what is near. This is why the first chapter belongs to the ordinary tablet, not because it is the most dramatic. It is very much not, but because it trains the hand. It teaches the habit of solving discomfort chemically. It establishes trust in a shelf full of answers. It makes the later, stronger answers feel like part of the same family, even when they behave very differently. The family resemblance can be misleading. A white tablet is a white tablet to a sleepy eye, but behind the colorless surface may lie a simple fever reducer, an anti-inflammatory agent, a local anesthetic in another form, an opioid, or a treatment drug designed for dependence itself. Packaging flattens these differences. History insists on restoring them. So tonight the aim is gentle sorting, nothing hurried, nothing grim for its own sake, just a slow walk from the bathroom cabinet to the hospital drawer, with pauses along the way to notice what each medicine really does, what it asks in return, and why some of them carry far more history than their labels admit. The ledger on the counter would approve of that approach. Ledgers like order. They like clear lines, exact doses, dates, initials, and quantities that add up properly. Human beings are less tidy. They save old tablets in travel bags. They split pills with butter knives. They forget whether they already took one. They trust advertisements with suspiciously calm fonts. And still, The shelves wait patiently. The strange generosity of medicine is that it keeps helping anyway. It helps the person with a fever at midnight. It helps the worker whose back has made a pointed objection to the afternoon. It helps the child with a pounding ear, and the adult with a swollen ankle, and the older neighbor whose hands dislike rain. The same shelf helps them all, though not in the same way. That is perhaps the softest dark side of pain relief. It looks universal. It seems simple. It offers one neat reply to many different miseries. But the fit is never perfect, and the price is never zero, and the deeper mechanisms are more various than the packaging suggests. A bottle can say relief without explaining what kind. Soon we will sort those kinds carefully. We will look at the quiet workhorses first, then the anti-inflammatory tablets, then the numbing agents that close a signal at its source, then the opioids that act through the doorway we have kept politely unnamed, then the medicines used to manage dependence itself, then the tiny, potent synthetics that sit at the far edge of ordinary intuition. The full spectrum is longer than most people expect. For now, the small white tablet near the sink remains where so many stories begin, waiting beside the glass of water as if 4,000 years of experiment had somehow learned to look completely ordinary. Near the open ledger, a little paper sleeve waits beside the scale. Inside it sit 2 white tablets that look as interesting as chalk. You could pass them 100 times in a bathroom cabinet without a thought. That is part of their gift and part of their trouble. The late shift has a way of making ordinary things seem newly specific. A bottle cap clicks somewhere down the counter, and the faint, clean smell of alcohol swabs hangs in the air. At this mild end of the shelf, pain relief dresses very plainly. It does not arrive with a trumpet, or even with interesting packaging. Acetaminophen has always leaned into that plainness. It sounds almost polite, and in much of the world it answers to paracetamol instead. The names differ, yet the little white tablet is the same quiet worker. In one drawer it is sold as a store brand, and in another it wears the Tylenol name like a neat coat. It had been known to chemists since the late 19th century, though not as the family favorite. It stepped into the center much later, around the middle of the 20th century. That rise was helped by a useful sort of modesty. It brought down pain and fever without advertising much drama elsewhere. By the 1950s it had become the kind of thing a parent might keep near the sugar tin. It appeared in syrups, in chewables, and in tablets stamped with numbers so tiny they needed squinting. If aspirin carried a whiff of the old apothecary, acetaminophen felt newly domestic. It belonged to kitchen drawers, bedside tables, and the small inner pocket of a travel bag. It works, mostly, in the brain and spinal cord, where pain and fever are being interpreted and managed. That means it lowers the volume on the message more than it fusses with the sore place itself. A swollen ankle remains swollen, even when the head feels less troubled by it. So it is very good for headaches and fevers, and merely polite around inflammation. It does not do much for a hot, puffy joint that wants its chemistry changed at the scene. This difference matters more than the box art suggests. 2 tablets can be the same shape and still work in very different rooms of the body. A person with a throbbing temple may bless acetaminophen before a meeting. A person with an angry molar or a stiff knee may notice it helps, though not always with much enthusiasm. In the neat ranking of tonight's shelf, it is a mild medicine. Its strength is familiar, and its dependence risk is low enough to barely stir the page. Nobody develops a life around acetaminophen in the way later drugs can invite. Its danger is not a craving, but a count. That count begins harmlessly enough. 1 tablet may hold 325 milligrams, or 500, or sometimes 650, in a slower form. Those numbers look tidy on a label. They look even tidier when half hidden inside a cold remedy, a flu powder, or a nighttime capsule with a moon on the box. This next part deserves a plain tone. The most common painkiller in many homes is also the one most likely to trouble the liver. The adult ceiling that matters is 4,000 milligrams in one day. Many clinicians prefer 3,000 as a gentler limit, because life has a habit of being less tidy than the instructions. The liver usually handles acetaminophen with calm efficiency. Most of the dose is turned into safer compounds and sent away in urine. A small part takes a darker route and becomes a toxic byproduct called NAPK. Under normal conditions, the body meets it with glutathione and mops it up without fanfare. The trouble comes when the mop is too small for the spill. Too much acetaminophen in too little time lets that toxic byproduct linger where it should not. That is why this modest tablet has such a stern private side. It is secretly the most hepatotoxic common drug in many medicine cabinets. The risk can arrive by accident, which feels especially unfair. A person takes tablets for a headache, then a cold medicine, then a bedtime dose, and the ingredient repeats under different fonts. The pharmacist glances at 3 nearly identical boxes and taps the tiny print. Many people believe brand names are active ingredients, which is an understandable but expensive theory, and yet people still don't read the label. Alcohol can narrow the liver's margin for error. So can fasting, illness, or the thin appetite that often comes along with feeling miserable in the first place. It is a quiet sort of danger, because nothing about the tablet looks dramatic. It is pale, dry, and ordinary, like a sugar substitute that has wandered into the wrong drawer. If taken as directed, it can be excellent company. It lowers fever, eases headaches, and does all this without roughing up the stomach the way some rivals do. That gentle stomach reputation is why many people trust it a little too much. Trust has always been a poor measuring spoon. There is something almost domestic about the liver's patience. It likes a routine day, a measured load, and no one arriving late with extra chores. You can feel how strange that is in a quiet shop like this. The plainest tablet on the shelf asks for the most exact respect. Even its history has that odd modesty. It became a household star not because it was glamorous, but because it seemed so unremarkable that it could be tucked anywhere. That is the common rhythm of over-the-counter medicine. Familiarity wears down caution the way fingertips wear smooth a favorite coin. A bottle nearby gives off the faintest vinegar note when its cap turns. That soft, sharp smell belongs to aspirin, which has been old-fashioned for so long that it looped back into modernity. Before aspirin was aspirin, there was salicylic acid in bark and leaves. People had chewed willow, brewed willow, and made peace with a taste often reviewed as damp tree. The old remedy worked, though crudely and with complaints. The stomach found raw salicylates far less charming than history books sometimes imply. Chemists spent the 19th century trying to make the useful part easier to live with. By 1899, Bayer had a product ready to launch under the name aspirin. The commercial timing was almost uncanny. A refined version of a very old plant remedy arrived dressed as modern science and tidy industry. Soon it was sold in powders and tablets and all the usual respectable ways. It became the sort of medicine kept in tins, pockets, handbags, and desk drawers with bent paper clips. For decades, aspirin raced ahead of explanation. It became one of the best-selling drugs on earth before anyone could say exactly why it worked so well. That is one of medicine's stranger manners. A tablet may become a global habit first, and only later submit its reasons. Scientists knew aspirin eased pain and lowered fever. They knew it could calm inflammatory aches, and they knew it had a special way of affecting blood. But the deep mechanism remained foggy for a surprisingly long time. The outline only sharpened in the 1970s, when its effect on prostaglandins and cyclooxygenase finally came into view. Even then, aspirin kept a little mystery tucked in its sleeve. It has a peculiar way of acetylating its target, and for years it was a triumph in search of a full diagram. So the old tablet sits on the shelf with a rare combination of confidence and secrecy. It had already conquered the world while its inner paperwork was still being filed. You can almost hear Gerald clearing his throat at that point. To him, uncertainty is no obstacle when aspirin is available in a bottle. He offers it for headaches, knees, colds, and moods that might improve with a biscuit. Then comes the family seal of approval, exactly as promised. My grandfather took aspirin for everything and lived to 93, on a farm. There's a kind of rural authority in that sentence which no randomized trial can quite imitate. The farm rises before the mind with boots, weather, and impossible confidence. The pharmacist does not argue much with ghosts or grandfathers. He only notes that ancestral survival is not the same as dosing guidance, and yet people still don't read the label. Aspirin's hidden cost is less secret than acetaminophen's, though still often treated casually. It can bother the stomach, and it can make bleeding easier because platelets stay affected for days. That lingering effect is part of why it became important in heart care for some people. It's also why it is not a casual snack in tablet form. An older bottle sometimes smells faintly vinegary because aspirin slowly breaks down. The tablet then tastes more bitter, and its age quietly announces itself before the label does. Some people still hear a soft ringing in the ears when doses run high. The body has a peculiar way of sending notes from the balcony. For all that, aspirin remains deeply woven into ordinary life. It belongs to grandparents, winter drawers, and travel tins that rattle beside a sewing kit. Its dependence risk is low. Nobody courts aspirin for euphoria, and no one becomes a romantic devotee of salicylate bliss. Yet familiarity can still lead a person astray. An old tablet may be respected too little, simply because it has been around longer than the wallpaper. The shelf moves along by tiny degrees of chemistry. One bottle comes from Willow's Old Bitterness, and the next from a lab bench in the post-war world. Ibuprofen arrives with a different sort of confidence. It's the medicine of strained backs, swollen gums, long flights, and knees that notice the weather before anyone else does. It was developed in the 1960s and first used by prescription before earning its over-the-counter freedom. In that sense, it had a brief youth in nicer clothes before being allowed into every supermarket basket. Naproxen followed with a similar family resemblance and a longer stride. It stays in the body longer, which is why it can last through a workday with fewer repeats. These drugs belong to the NSAID group, which stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. The name is clunky, but the idea is simple enough when the evening is quiet. Unlike acetaminophen, they work out where the tissues are making trouble. They reduce prostaglandins not only in the brain, but around the irritated place itself. That is why a throbbing ankle may prefer ibuprofen over acetaminophen. The drug is speaking partly to the sore tissue, not only to the person noticing it. The relief can feel more concrete in inflammatory pain. A gum, a joint, or a tendon may seem less hot, less swollen, and less insistent. Ibuprofen usually comes in 200 mg tablets on the open shelf. Naproxen sodium often appears as 220 mg, with dosing spaced farther apart because its half-life is longer. Those tiny numbers hide a larger difference in temperament. Ibuprofen is the brisk one that asks for another visit sooner, and naproxen is the slower guest who keeps the chair longer. Neither carries much dependence risk in the classic sense. People may rely on them for aching days, but they do not seize the reward system the way later drugs can. Their trouble lies elsewhere, and the stomach knows this first. The same prostaglandins that help create pain also help maintain the stomach's protective lining. That lining is not just passive wallpaper. It is an active little housekeeping system of mucus, bicarbonate, blood flow, and constant repair. When NSAIDs lower prostaglandins, the stomach loses some of that quiet support. Acid then feels less like a normal resident and more like an unruly tenant. Food does not magically solve the chemistry, though it can soften the encounter. A biscuit, a bowl of soup, or even a piece of toast gives the stomach something else to negotiate with. This is where Dr. Overconfident makes his entrance, carrying no food and a great deal of certainty. He announces with full confidence, "I looked it up, and it turns out the dosage is really more of a suggestion." He is not seriously harmed, because the universe is patient with comic men. Still, he swallows ibuprofen on an empty stomach and earns a complaint just below the ribs before the kettle finishes. The complaint is not dramatic. It is more of a hollow, sour mutter, like a kettle thinking dark thoughts in the next room. He spends the next hour standing oddly straight and reconsidering his scholarship. Bread, at that point, begins to seem less optional. The pharmacist watches this familiar pageant without surprise. He has observed that many adults treat the phrase "take with food" as a personal insult, and yet people still don't read the label. The stomach is only one organ with an opinion here. Kidneys also use prostaglandins to help manage blood flow, especially when the body is dry or under strain. So an NSAID can be harder on the kidneys than acetaminophen, particularly in people who are older, dehydrated, or already unwell. The risk is not cinematic, only specific and unromantic. It tends to arrive in ordinary scenes. A hot day, too little water, a stomach bug, a long run, or a person who simply forgot lunch. That is the recurring lesson of this end of the shelf. Every tablet asks one organ to take a turn doing extra paperwork. Acetaminophen loads the liver. Aspirin and its cousins lean on the stomach, the platelets, and sometimes the kidneys. Strength matters too, though not always in the way people guess. A stronger medicine is not just the one that feels stronger, but the one that alters more systems while it works. Ibuprofen may outperform acetaminophen for an inflamed shoulder and still be a worse pick for a person with ulcers. Naproxen may last longer and still be less welcome in a dry, overworked body. so the ranking grows more interesting than brand loyalty usually allows. Each drug is less a hero than a specialist with poor bedside manners somewhere off stage. Gerald, however, hears none of this and remains doctrinal. He would still hand out aspirin for the headache, the ankle, and perhaps a disappointing pie crust, then cite the farm again with complete sincerity. The family story is warm, even if the pharmacology is selective. Old remedies collect loyalty the way old armchairs collect blankets. You can feel the chapter's lesson in the small noises around the counter. Foil peels, caps turn, and every packet makes the same soft promise of ordinary relief. Yet the hidden costs are already sharply divided. One tablet drifts toward the liver, another toward the stomach, and another toward the thin chemistry of clotting blood. That is why the shelf deserves a slower look than habit usually grants it. A familiar drug can still have a private life. Acetaminophen seems almost invisible until the dose total is counted. Aspirin seems almost quaint until the stomach or the platelets remember their part. Ibuprofen seems like common sense until dinner is skipped. Naproxen seems convenient until a long half-life means the body is still discussing it after the person has stopped thinking about it. None of this makes the medicines villains. It only makes them specific, which is often more useful and always less glamorous. The absurd part is how ordinary the packaging remains. Serious chemistry still arrives under pastel branding, with a child-proof cap and a coupon. So the shelf begins not with thrills, but with paper cuts of reality. The mildest end of pain relief is already full of trade-offs, labels, and tiny numbers that matter very much. You rest a fingertip on the counter and can almost sort them by temperament. Liver tablet, stomach tablet, old mystery tablet, longer-lasting anti-inflammatory with opinions. The pharmacist closes the ledger halfway and leaves one page marked with a pencil. Even here, among the plain white tablets, the past has not become simpler, only more legible, and that is the cozy strangeness of modern pain relief. The household drawer looks peaceful, while each tablet carries a very exact idea of where the bill will be sent. The counter has picked up that late-hour stillness when every small sound seems kindly enlarged. A glass bottle gives a soft click. A page in the formulary ledger lifts and falls. Somewhere behind you, the cooler hum stays level and patient. Into that calm comes Dr. Overconfident. One hand resting over his middle with wounded surprise, he clears his throat in the manner of a man preparing a legal defense for his own stomach. Then he says, with familiar dignity, "I looked it up, and it turns out the dosage is really more of a suggestion." The pharmacist does not look up at once. He places a pencil beside the ledger. He folds his glasses closed and opens them again, which is not the same as taking a deep breath, though it is close. Dr. Overconfident explains that the ibuprofen worked splendidly for his back. He omits the empty stomach until asked. He also omits the second dose taken with coffee until asked again. The shelf behind the counter holds pain relief in several moods of seriousness. There are neat boxes with cheerful branding. There are plain packets with hospital fonts. There are tablets so ordinary looking that history had the nerve to hide entire chemical revolutions inside them. Tonight the revolution looks like a tender stomach and a patient man reading a label aloud. The pharmacist lifts the ibuprofen box as if it were evidence in a very dull but necessary trial. He reads every line with a level voice. He reads about dose spacing, food, water, stomach upset, and not taking more than directed. He reads the warnings in the same tone used for train times and weather reports. He does not hurry. He reads until the room itself seems to understand that printed words are meant to be obeyed. Dr. Overconfident listens with the expression of someone meeting his own past choices in formal handwriting. A paper cup leaves a faint wet ring on the counter. The fluorescent light catches the silver edge of a blister pack. The room smells of cardboard, clean shelves, and that faint hospital clean note, which never quite becomes a smell. Then the pharmacist closes the box and offers his verdict with dry precision. Tablets are not tiny dares, he says, and yet people still don't read the label. From the bench near the radiator comes Gerald's voice, already prepared. He says this would not have happened with aspirin. He says it with the confidence of a man who has appointed himself the unpaid press secretary for one particular century. Then he adds his family citation because he always does. My grandfather took aspirin for everything and lived to 93, on a farm. No one argues with the farm. The pharmacist merely asks what exactly Gerald believes the stomach lining is meant to do with aspirin. Gerald says it would have known how to behave. This is not, as it happens, a recognized mechanism. You can feel the chapter shifting under your hand now. The ordinary shelf of familiar tablets is giving way to the versions kept a little farther back. The labels become stricter, the dosing windows narrow, the pharmacist's eyebrows begin doing more administrative work. Prescription-strength anti-inflammatory drugs often feel less like new inventions than louder versions of old ideas. They still aim at pain and swelling. They still work through that same broad family of chemical signals. They simply arrive with firmer instructions and less patience for improvisation. Ketorolac is one of those names that seems to arrive wearing hospital shoes. It often enters the story after surgery, or in an emergency room, or after a night when pain has stopped being reasonable company. It is an NSAID, which sounds almost modest, until one notices how carefully everyone handles it. Hospitals like Ketorolac because it can be strong without being an opioid. That matters in practical, sleepy ways. A patient may be less foggy. Breathing is not slowed in the same way. Nurses can watch fewer drifting eyelids and more useful pain scores. But Ketorolac has a temperament. It is not invited to stay long. Short course only means just that. In practice, it often means a few doses, or a day or two, and rarely more than 5 days altogether. 5 days is not a poetic number. It is a hard little fence built from experience. Past that point, stomach bleeding, kidney strain, and other unpleasant bills become more likely. The body is willing to bargain for relief, but not forever, and not at a discount. The pharmacist reaches for a packet of Ketorolac, and even the packet looks stern. The print is small and serious. The tablets are plain. They have none of the bedtime friendliness of a familiar bottle kept beside toothpaste and forgotten receipts. When this drug is dispensed, it is usually paired with timing. There may be a chart at the bedside. There may be a nurse marking the hour in blue ink. There may be water in a plastic cup with a bendy straw that makes everyone feel 6 years old again. Hospitals also keep an eye on kidneys with these drugs, because kidneys are patient until they are not. A blood test may be checked. Urine output may be noted. The person receiving the medicine might only notice that someone seems unusually interested in a plastic jug. That is how medicine often looks in real life. It is less thunder and more note-taking. It is less grand cure and more someone checking whether you have eaten, peed, swallowed, or misunderstood a label. Diclofenac comes from the same family, but it wears different clothes. Sometimes it appears as a tablet. Sometimes it is a powder packet. Sometimes it arrives as a gel in a tube, which gives it the air of being less important than it is. By tablet, diclofenac can be effective and rather useful. Doctors may choose it for joint pain, back pain, or the sort of inflammation that keeps turning up like a neighbor with no clear reason to visit. It can work well. That is exactly why it earns careful handling. The carefulness is not decorative. Like other NSAIDs, diclofenac can bother the stomach. It can trouble the kidneys. It can also raise concern for the heart and blood vessels, especially when doses climb or time stretches. So the phrase, short course only, appears again, and means ordinary things in ordinary rooms. It means a few days, not a season. It means taking the tablets with food. It means not treating the instruction leaflet as optional literature beside the cereal box. The pharmacist dispenses diclofenac with a look that says several things at once. It says this may help. It says this is not candy. It says he has watched many adults behave like unsupervised goats around pain medicine, and yet people still don't read the label. Dr. Overconfidence, still holding his midsection with offended restraint, asks whether prescription strength simply means stronger relief. The answer is yes and also no, which is deeply unsatisfying but very common in pharmacology. A stronger anti-inflammatory effect may come with a smaller margin for cheerful nonsense. That is why stronger does not automatically mean better. It often means narrower. The path between relief and trouble gets thinner. Meals start to matter. Hydration matters. Existing kidney disease matters. Other medicines matter in the way spices matter when the soup is already close to ruined. At this point, Gerald cannot bear it any longer. He says aspirin managed perfectly well before all these modern refinements. He speaks as though the 20th century developed entirely in order to disappoint his unclely instincts. This is where the old mystery quietly returns. Aspirin had been doing something useful for decades before anyone could point to the exact machinery. That sounds strange now, but medicine often knew that a thing worked long before it knew the wiring behind the wall. You can almost feel the shelf leaning backward in time. Aspirin came into common medical life in the late 19th century. It lowered pain, eased fever, and calmed inflammation with immense reliability. It did all this while keeping its method mostly to itself. Doctors prescribed it, patients trusted it, factories made it by the ton. Yet the exact inner explanation remained foggy for roughly 70 years. That long delay feels almost cozy now. It is the kind of old scientific mystery that sat in plain view, like a clock that always told the right time, while nobody knew how the gears meshed. The tablet worked. The tablet did not feel obliged to explain itself. Gerald, naturally, takes this as proof of aspirin's character. He seems to believe the pill acted through honesty, backbone, and a general commitment to proper standards. Chemistry, however, had a different answer, and a much less sentimental one. In 1971, John Vane helped make the hidden mechanism visible. He used careful lab methods to show that aspirin-like drugs block the making of prostaglandins. The name sounds a little grand, but prostaglandins are mostly busy local messengers with a great deal to say. They are made in tissues around the body. They help raise the feeling of pain. They help drive fever. They help call up swelling and tenderness when the body decides a problem should be taken seriously. They also do smaller housekeeping jobs, which is where the trouble begins. Some prostaglandins help protect the stomach lining. Some help regulate blood flow in the kidneys. Some help platelets clump together when a blood vessel needs quick repair. This was the missing thread. Aspirin had not been floating around the bloodstream offering vague comfort by force of personality. It had been blocking an enzyme involved in making prostaglandins. Less prostaglandin signaling meant less pain, less fever, and less inflammation. The discovery answered an old question with satisfying plainness. Aspirin worked because it interrupted a chemical message system. It had been doing that perfectly well since long before most people knew the system existed. There is something very human in that timeline. Whole generations swallowed aspirin for headaches, aching joints, and winter fevers. Only later did science catch up and say, in effect, here is the exact hinge it has been pushing all along. If you glance at the shelves now, they seem slightly more talkative. Every packet suggests a hidden mechanism. Every cream, tablet, and patch has some small private way of nudging the body. The quiet miracle is not that people forgot this, but that pills can look so plain while doing something so exact. Vane's work did not arrive alone and then stop. The wider study of prostaglandins kept growing through the 1970s. Scientists mapped how these compounds were made, how quickly they acted, and how many local jobs they performed before vanishing again. That body of work was honored in 1982. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine went to Sune Bergstrom, Bengt Samuelsson, and John Vane for discoveries about prostaglandins and related active substances. The prize did not say aspirin was magic. It said the message system was real, important, and finally understood. Gerald receives this news like a man being told his favorite hammer has, regrettably, a handle. He is not impressed by enzymes. He mutters that his grandfather never needed prostaglandins explained. No one points out that his grandfather almost certainly had them anyway. Once prostaglandins are in the room, several old confusions become easier to sort. Why does aspirin reduce pain and fever? Why can it upset the stomach? Why can it affect bleeding? Why do its cousins seem similar yet differ at the edges? The answer keeps coming back to which prostaglandin jobs get quieted and where. The enzyme family involved here is usually called COX, that is short for cyclooxygenase, which sounds like a machine you should not touch without permission. In simple terms, it is part of the pathway that helps build prostaglandins from fatty acids in cell membranes. For a while, one COX looked much like another. Then the picture sharpened. Scientists recognized that there were at least two main forms involved in this story called COX-1 and COX-2. That distinction would soon tempt medicine into redesign. COX-1 does a fair amount of daily housekeeping. It helps protect the stomach lining. It helps platelets work and clotting. It helps maintain some regular body functions that are easier to appreciate when they are not interrupted. COX-2 is more tied to inflammation and pain during injury or illness. That made a tidy engineering dream. If a drug could block COX-2 while sparing COX-1, perhaps it could calm pain without battering the stomach quite so much. It was the kind of idea that makes researchers sit up straighter. This was not a silly dream. Basic NSAIDs like ibuprofen and naproxen hit both enzymes to differing degrees. That broad action helps explain both their usefulness and their side effects. So selective COX-2 blockers were designed to be a cleaner tool. Celecoxib is the surviving famous example. It reached practice with the promise of keeping some anti-inflammatory power while reducing stomach ulcers and related irritation for certain patients. For people who truly needed anti-inflammatory treatment and had stomach concerns, that promise mattered. On the shelf, celecoxib looks entirely too ordinary for the argument wrapped around it. A capsule can roll under a chair as easily as any other capsule. A medicine cup can hold it with no sense of history. Yet behind it sits a very modern wish to separate relief from cost. And for a while, it seemed that medicine had done something clever. Patients could get pain relief with less damage to stomach protection than older NSAIDs often caused. Fewer stomach ulcers for some people was not a small convenience. It meant fewer miserable nights and fewer serious complications. This part deserves to be told plainly. The body's balancing systems are rarely grateful when one pathway is adjusted and another is spared. In trying to protect the stomach, selective COX-2 drugs shifted other signals in the blood vessels and platelets. A cardiovascular trade-off emerged. For some drugs in this class, the heart risk became too large to ignore. Rates of heart attack and stroke rose enough to change practice and, in some cases, remove medicines from the market. The neat design had solved one problem while uncovering another. Celecoxib remained, but with more caution around it. Doctors began to think harder about dose, duration, and who should take it. The question was no longer simply, does it spare the stomach? The question became, for this specific person, what risk is being moved where? That is the quiet truth behind many elegant drug designs. A medicine can be smarter than its predecessor and still not be simple. The body is less like a row of labeled drawers and more like a kitchen where steam from one pot reaches all the others. So celecoxib found its place, but not as a carefree fix. It can still be useful. It may be a reasonable choice for some people with arthritis or other inflammatory pain. Yet doctors weigh heart history, blood pressure, kidney function, and timing with more care than the early promise once suggested. Even the way it is discussed has changed. The early tone around selective COX-2 drugs carried a little of that hopeful late-century confidence that engineering would finally make the old trade-offs disappear. Medicine has become more modest since then, which is often healthier for everyone. You can hear that modesty in the room now. The pharmacist sets one box beside another. Older NSAID, selective COX-2 inhibitor, same shelf, different risks. No drumroll, just choices. And a pen tapping once against cardboard. Gerald asks whether aspirin not only works, but also proves superior on moral grounds. The pharmacist says chemistry does not award medals for attitude. Gerald makes a sound that suggests he disagrees with both chemistry and medals. Dr. Overconfident, meanwhile, has become very interested in the phrase stomach lining. He asks whether his recent complaint is really just ordinary irritation or whether something more mysterious has occurred. The pharmacist tells him that mystery is rarely needed when one has taken ibuprofen twice on coffee and optimism. The answer is irritatingly ordinary. NSAIDs reduce prostaglandins. Prostaglandins help maintain protective mucus and other defenses in the stomach. Remove enough of that help, especially on an empty stomach. It writes back with burning, cramping, sourness, and a general loss of good manners. That complaint does not make Dr. Overconfident exceptional. It makes him common. The shelves have seen his kind before, usually carrying a sports bottle and a heroic misunderstanding of dosage intervals. The pharmacist does not scold. He simply rereads the label section about food, water, and timing with the same patient tone as before. Then he adds that the stomach is not a test kitchen for anti-inflammatory experiments. There is a rustle from Gerald's bench. He says more softly now that aspirin would have taught the stomach discipline. It is a weaker line than earlier, and even he seems to hear that. No one needs to say the obvious correction aloud. Aspirin can also irritate the stomach. It can do so quite efficiently. Family loyalty does not change enzyme inhibition, however moving the farm may be. For a few moments, the room settles into a practical silence. A receipt prints in faint gray lines. Someone in the back closes a drawer. The pharmacist writes a small note on the bag with a ballpoint pen that has become dented at the cap. There is comfort in this kind of care, not in the pain and not in the side effects, but in the fact that medicine has rituals for the ordinary trouble people cause themselves. A small bag, a warning repeated twice, a meal before the next dose. By now the spectrum of pain relief is beginning to widen in a different direction. Some medicines work by changing how the body generates pain signals over large areas. Others do something much smaller and stranger. They simply stop one patch of tissue from sending messages for a while. A tray near the register holds this quieter branch of the family. There is lidocaine jelly in flat packets. There are patches with stiff paper backs. There are sprays and gels for mouths and throats, some labeled benzocaine in large, reassuring letters. These medicines feel modest because they work locally. That is the key difference. An NSAID goes through the body and changes inflammatory signaling in many places at once. A topical anesthetic tries to hush only the nerves in one chosen spot. The experience is different from the start. A lidocaine patch peels with a soft, papery sound. A numbing gel feels cold for a moment. Benzocaine on a sore gum can taste faintly medicinal and oddly sweet, like someone tried to flavor a dentist's waiting room. Their mechanism is different too. Lidocaine and benzocaine do not mainly quiet prostaglandins. They block sodium channels in nerve cells. That means the nerve cannot easily fire the electrical signal that would normally carry pain along. It is less like turning down the house lights and more like pinching one wire. The message fails to leave the area or leaves weakly. The person notices numbness or tingling, or that pleasantly eerie sense that the skin has become present but unbothered. Because the effect is local, these medicines are useful for very specific, small tasks. A lidocaine patch may help an irritated nerve or a sore spot after shingles. A benzocaine gel may calm a mouth ulcer long enough to eat soup without resentment. A throat spray may make swallowing less dramatic for an afternoon. The details of use are wonderfully ordinary. A patch must be placed on intact skin. Hands should be washed after applying gels. The paper backing sticks to one thumb at exactly the wrong moment. The instructions mention time limits because even local medicines dislike enthusiasm. Dentists, of course, have made local anesthetics part of modern life in a very direct way. A swab on the gum, a pinch, then the slow bloom of numbness in one cheek, while the rest of the person remains fully present and somewhat conversational. That is the essential distinction. Topical and local anesthetics do not generally treat systemic pain. They do not calm an aching back by circulating broadly through the body and changing inflammation everywhere. They quiet nerve conduction right where they are placed, and mostly nowhere else. That is why they never sit at the addictive end of the spectrum. They do not usually produce euphoria. They do not flood the brain's reward pathways in the way that certain stronger central pain medicines can. They solve a local signal problem without creating a larger mood event. A person may like the relief, of course. Anyone with a raw mouth sore will greet numbness as a small blessing. But liking relief is not the same thing as the drug teaching the brain to chase it in widening circles. That said, local does not mean careless. Too much applied over too large an area can still cause trouble. Broken skin changes absorption. Children and older adults may need more caution. The label remains a legal poem about limits because bodies remain inventive. The pharmacist taps a box of lidocaine cream as though it were making his point for him. People assume that if a medicine is spread on the skin, it doesn't count very much, he says. Creams, patches, gels, and sprays all count, and yet people still don't read the label. There is no laugh after that one, only the gentle sound of the register drawer sliding shut. The room has become a place where even jokes feel like filing systems. Benzocaine, the softer-sounding cousin, has a long career in minor discomfort. It is sat in lozenges, gels, and sprays meant for throats, gums, and mouth sores. It is common enough to feel harmless, which is always an excellent reason to stay a little respectful. Lidocaine tends to have broader medical use. Doctors use it topically. Dentists inject it. Emergency rooms use it in certain procedures. The name appears on patches, viscous mouth rinses, and vials in hospital trays with labels printed in tidy black type. In all those forms, the principle stays the same. It blocks nerve signaling where it is placed. It does not persuade the whole body to reinterpret pain. It simply keeps one local alarm from reaching the switchboard. There is a certain mercy in that narrowness. Not every pain problem needs a drug to travel through blood, liver, kidneys, stomach, and mood. Sometimes a single irritated patch wants only to stop shouting at nearby nerves for a few hours. Compared with the deeper medicines still waiting farther down tonight's spectrum, these local anesthetics feel almost domestic. They belong with sticky backing sheets, cotton swabs, and a small household drama of trying not to touch the sore place while the numbness takes hold. They have none of the grand, dangerous charisma that stronger drugs may carry. No one writes legends about benzocaine. No one builds a personality around a lidocaine patch. They are practical, focused, and faintly boring, which in medicine is often close to praise. Dr. Overconfident asks whether a lidocaine patch might help his stomach. The pharmacist looks at him over the frames of his glasses in a silence so clean it could sterilize metal. Then he says the patch is for local pain, not internal regret. Even Gerald declines to assist this line of thinking. He studies a bottle of antacid tablets with new respect. The farm has gone quiet for the moment. The evening seems improved by that. On the counter, the open ledger waits beside the newest bag. A note has been written on it in small block letters. Take with food. Use the least that helps. Stop if the stomach complains again. None of this is glamorous, which is precisely why it works. The chapter has moved a good distance from the bathroom cabinet now. What began with familiar over-the-counter confidence has reached the stricter middle shelves, where anti-inflammatory drugs become stronger, labels become sharper, and chemistry stops tolerating improvisation. Aspirin's old mystery has also been tidied away. It had not been mysterious because it was mystical. It had been mysterious because science had not yet found the pathway. Once prostaglandins and COX enzymes came into focus, the family resemblance among these medicines became easier to see. The resemblance does not erase the differences. Aspirin has its own quirks. Ibuprofen and naproxen have theirs. Ketorolac and diclofenac demand shorter leases. Celecoxib tries to spare one trouble and may uncover another. Local anesthetics stand a little apart from the whole clan. They do not negotiate with inflammation in the bloodstream. They do not trim fever. They do not lean on the brain's deeper reward circuits. They simply quiet a chosen patch of nerve traffic and then step aside. If you listen closely, the pharmacy itself seems to approve this sorting. One drawer slides in, another clicks shut, a bottle settles against wood. The place sounds like a patient mind putting ideas back into their correct compartments. Dr. Overconfident takes his bag with care this time. He asks what counts as food. The pharmacist says something more substantial than coffee and self-belief. Even the fluorescent hum seems briefly pleased. Gerald prepares one final appeal on behalf of aspirin, then seems to think better of it. He only says, "Fine." It is not a surrender exactly. It is, however, the first one-syllable concession pharmacology has ever extracted from him. That tiny victory is enough for one evening. Outside, the hour has become thinner and softer. Inside, the shelves remain lined with their patient little arguments. Every box holds a mechanism. Every mechanism carries a cost. Every cost looks smaller in warm light and clear instructions. And so you linger a moment longer at the counter, where strong tablets, selective enzymes, and numb little patches have all had their quiet turn. The story has not yet reached the grander and stranger medicines. For now it rests here among stomach linings, local nerves, and the very human hope that one relief might finally come, without a bill attached. Near the open ledger, a brown bottle waits beside a cloudy measuring spoon. Its paper label has gone a little soft at the edges from old fingers and damp air. The syrup inside catches the low light like weak tea with too much sugar. This is the first shelf where pain relief begins to speak in a slower and more persuasive voice. You can almost smell it before the cap is turned. There is that thick cherry note that never quite hides the medicine beneath it. There is alcohol in some old formulas, and sweetener in others. There is always a sense that someone tried very hard to make a serious thing taste like bedtime. Codeine spent many years living this double life. It quieted coughs, so it sat in bottles for winter chests and raw throats. It softened pain, so it moved into tablets for sore teeth and healing limbs. It was familiar enough to seem almost domestic, which was part of its strange power. A cough syrup bottle looks harmless in the way a teapot looks harmless. It sits still. It pours neatly. It even comes with a polite little cup that suggests moderation in bedtime. Yet the ingredient inside belongs to a family that changes far more than fever or swelling ever did. The reason begins in the liver. Codeine itself is not the whole performance. It is more like a note handed to the body with instructions attached. A liver enzyme, called CYP2D6, reads that note and turns some of the codeine into morphine. That quiet act explains many old arguments at kitchen tables. One person would swear codeine was marvelous and made the cough settle like dust. Another would say it did almost nothing except make the mouth dry. Both could be right because their livers were not doing the same work. About 1 person in 10 gets very little from codeine at all. Their CYP2D6 system is sluggish at this job, and the bottle may as well be mostly manners. The cough may stay, the pain may stay. The only clear result may be annoyance and a sticky spoon in the sink. Others sit at the opposite end. Their bodies convert codeine much faster, and the same dose lands with more weight than expected. A standard tablet can feel surprisingly strong. A cough syrup can make the room seem softer than the label promised. So the old bottle was never as simple as it looked. Its dose was measured in teaspoons and small milliliters, yet the true effect was partly hidden inside each patient. The pharmacist had seen this many times in the evening queue, when one family praised a syrup and another called it worthless, and yet people still don't read the label. Codeine also had a habit of making itself useful in several rooms at once. It touched the cough reflex and the brainstem. It dulled aching after a dental visit. It made some people sleepy enough to welcome it after midnight. It made others wonder why their thoughts had become padded with wool. That padded feeling was the clue. This was no longer the tidy world of prostaglandins and inflamed joints. This was not a tablet asking sore tissue to calm down. This was a drug leaning closer to the brain itself and asking the alarm to lower its voice. You can feel that change in the room, even with the bottle closed. The fluorescent hum seems steadier near these shelves. The wood counter feels cooler under the wrist. The names on the boxes get a little more careful, as if the alphabet itself has started wearing a white coat. Codeine often traveled with company. In one place it became Tylenol 3. In another it was called cocodamol. On the blister pack it looked almost boring, because one half of the tablet was plain acetaminophen, and plain acetaminophen has the gift of looking innocent beside nearly anything. Those mixed tablets are clever in the way a 2-in-1 tool is clever. 2 different mechanisms can help one pain more than either alone. A small amount of codeine can add a soft opioid layer. Acetaminophen can do its quiet work beside it, without asking the same receptor to carry the whole load. The difficulty is arithmetic. A patient taking 1 tablet is taking 2 drugs at once, whether that is remembered or not. The codeine may still seem modest. The acetaminophen may already be marching toward its daily ceiling with patient little feet. This is where labels stop being decoration. A common tablet might hold 30 milligrams of codeine and 300 or 325 of acetaminophen. Another might hold 15 and 500. The tablet is small, but the math behind it is fussy, and it does not care how tired the patient is. If the pain is still there, the temptation is simple. Take another, then perhaps another before sleep, then count the codeine and forget the rest, because codeine is the ingredient that sounds interesting. Acetaminophen, by contrast, sounds like stationary, but the ceiling belongs to the duller name. There is only so much acetaminophen a liver should be asked to process in one day. That limit arrives before most people would ever reach a dramatic codeine dose from combination tablets. The plain white partner ends up holding the leash. This is why combination products confuse otherwise sensible people. A bottle of codeine alone can be counted one way. A box of acetaminophen alone can be counted another. Put them in the same tablet, and a patient suddenly needs both a clock and a calculator, which is an unfair demand after midnight. Dr. Overconfident once held such a box under the lamp and cleared his throat. I looked it up, and it turns out the dosage is really more of a suggestion, he said, with the solemn pride of a man announcing a weather theory. The pharmacist turned the carton around and tapped the acetaminophen line first. Dr. Overconfident was still carrying antacids for that earlier lesson with ibuprofen. The box in his hand rattled softly as he shifted his weight. His stomach had not forgiven him, though it had settled into a kind of disapproving truce. He looked at the numbers longer than usual, which counted as growth. A mixed tablet can help beautifully when used with care. It may let a person sleep through a sharper night after a procedure. It may spare stronger medicines entirely. It may also persuade someone that the codeine can be increased freely, when in truth, the acetaminophen has already started shaking its head. That ceiling is one quiet reason codeine stayed in the middle tier for so long. It felt stronger than the common drugs, yet weaker than the medicines waiting farther down the shelf. It had built-in limits in many products. It could help enough to seem respectable, while still sounding faintly old-fashioned, like a cough lozenge with a passport. You can sense that old-fashioned air in the packaging. The fonts are often sober. The leaflets are dense and folded like little maps. The warnings about sleepiness, alcohol, and driving sit there in neat columns, as if danger becomes manageable when printed in 8-point type. Still, codeine's real strangeness was not its packaging. It was that the drug could do nothing in one body and far too much in another, while both swallowed the same amount. The spoon, the cup, the tablet, and the folded leaflet all looked equal. The liver, hidden and quiet, declined to agree. A soft cough medicine that can turn partly into morphine is not a trivial thing. The name codeine often softened it too much in ordinary conversation. It sounded gentler than it was. It sounded like something one might keep between throat pastilles and peppermint tea, which history allowed for far too long. By the 1990s, another middle-shelf drug arrived with a newer face. Its capsules sat flatter in their foil, and its name sounded brisker. Tramadol did not smell of cherries or old pharmacies. It belonged to the era of laminated leaflets and healthcare optimism, and it liked to present itself as a clever compromise. That compromise was heavily advertised in spirit, if not always in honesty. Tramadol was spoken about as though it were not quite an opioid. It was placed in a hazy middle category, somewhere between everyday pain relief and the more serious narcotic class. The word "not quite" did a great deal of work. In practice, the body was less impressed by the marketing. Tramadol does activate opioid receptors. It belongs on this shelf for a reason. It simply does not stop there, which is where the story grows more awkward and the leaflet starts needing a calmer, firmer voice. A box of Tramadol often feels ordinary in the hand. It is light. The capsules may be pale green, white, or peach. The blister pockets crack with that dry little sound, familiar to anyone who has ever tried to press one tablet out in the dark without waking the household. Inside, though, the mechanism is untidy. Part of Tramadol's effect comes from weak opioid activity. Another part comes from changing levels of serotonin and norepinephrine, two of the brain's message chemicals. So the drug arrives like a guest who offers to help wash dishes and then quietly rearranges the kitchen. That second action made it unexpectedly difficult company. Many people were already taking medicines that touch serotonin for mood, sleep, or migraine. Add Tramadol, and the mix could become awkward fast. Suddenly, the doctor had to ask about every capsule, every tablet, and every cheerful over-the-counter surprise from the bottom drawer. The problem was not always obvious to the patient. A person might know that pain pills affect pain. That part seems refreshingly literal. Fewer people expect a pain medicine to start negotiating with the same brain chemical pathways touched by antidepressants, nausea drugs, and some cough remedies. So Tramadol earned a strange reputation. Some found it mild and manageable. Some found it unpleasantly dizzying. Some found it did very little until a higher dose. Some discovered, to their surprise, that stopping it after regular use had not been emotionally simple at all. Like codeine, Tramadol also depends partly on metabolism. The liver converts some of it into a stronger metabolite, and CYP2D6 appears again in the background. That means one body may lean more on the opioid part, while another feels more of the other chemical effects. A leaflet tries to summarize this. A leaflet cannot fully perform it. The pharmacist had a dry way of describing Tramadol. He called it a medicine that never liked being left alone with the rest of a patient's medication list. He had seen it arrive beside antidepressants, sleeping tablets, and migraine medicines with the air of a guest who swore he would only stay 15 minutes, and yet people still don't read the label. Tramadol also carried a faint historical perfume of reassurance. It was long presented as safer than the older opioids, or at least less likely to lead a patient down the familiar corridor of tolerance and dependence. That was comforting to prescribers. It was also in many cases far more optimistic than the evidence deserved. You can almost hear that bold optimism in the paper inserts. They rustle with confidence. They list common side effects in tidy order. They give the impression that modern pharmacology has smoothed every rough edge with enough bullet points and proper spacing. The body, as usual, remains slightly more handmade than the paperwork. The middle tier is full of such half-promises. Codeine says it is only a cough syrup or a modest add-on tablet. Tramadol says it is not quite the thing you are worried about. Both are standing near the same door, even when one is wearing pajamas and the other is pretending to be office casual. This is the place where the hidden thread finally needs its name. The old mystery, separating mild pain relief from a truly habit-forming drug, is not simply strength. It is not milligrams. It is not whether the tablet is sold in a supermarket or kept behind a locked drawer. It is the receptor being touched. Its full name is the mu opioid receptor. Doctors write the Greek letter, patients hear the sound mu, and often remember it better that way. It is a protein set in the membrane of certain nerve cells, waiting for particular chemical keys, and life changes quietly when the right key fits. These receptors sit in several important places. They are found in the brain, where pain is interpreted and meaning is given to relief. They are found in the spinal cord, where signals climb upward from injured tissue. They are found in the gut as well, which explains why some pain medicines unexpectedly become breakfast conversation. Under ordinary conditions, the body has its own keys. Endorphins and related natural opioids drift through at moments of stress, exertion, and relief. They bind briefly. They help soften pain or calm distress. They are part of the body's own small pharmacy, made on site and used sparingly. Opioid drugs borrow that system. Some are weak. Some are very strong. Codeine reaches it after the liver changes part of it into morphine. Tramadol reaches it more awkwardly and less cleanly, but both cross into the same basic neighborhood, and the neighborhood matters. When the mu opioid receptor is activated, pain signals lose force. The nervous system becomes less eager to pass the message along at full volume. A sore tooth matters less. A healing wound feels farther away. The body is not always less damaged, but the mind is less surrounded by the feeling of damage. That alone would be important enough. Yet the mu opioid receptor also sits near the circuits of reward and comfort. Its activation can reduce the usual braking signals on dopamine. Dopamine then rises in places where the brain keeps track of what should be remembered, repeated, and valued. That is why this tier feels different. A drug that only calms inflammation may help, and then be forgotten. An opioid can help and also feel warm, safe, and unusually meaningful. Relief becomes paired with comfort. Comfort becomes paired with memory. Memory, being diligent, writes the whole thing down. Not everyone feels that glow in the same way. Some people mainly feel sleepiness or nausea. Some feel little pleasure at all. Some notice a gentle spreading ease that includes the pain, but is not limited to it. The difference matters, because the brain is more likely to return to what it found deeply reassuring. This is also why an opioid cannot be understood only by asking whether pain improved. Two patients may both report relief. One is simply grateful to rest. Another has also felt a bright little emotional untangling that the body did not know it needed. The prescription pad sees the same dose. The inner experience is not identical. Repeated activation changes the receptor system itself. The brain is an obedient and thrifty organ. If a pathway is pushed again and again, it adjusts. Receptors may become less responsive. Some are pulled inward from the cell surface. The same dose then produces less effect than it once did. That change is called tolerance. It does not arrive with fanfare. It often looks like a modest increase, or a tablet that now feels merely normal. A patient may think the pain is worse. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the nervous system has simply redrawn its expectations in pencil. Dependence grows nearby. If the receptor system has adapted to regular opioid activity, the absence of the drug stops feeling neutral. The body notices. Sleep may feel ragged. Pain itself may seem louder, because the quieting system has shifted and now wants its familiar key. This part deserves to be told plainly. The same doorway that offers relief can also teach the brain to want relief in a repeated and increasingly specific form. That is the real line this chapter has been walking toward. It is not about tablets becoming dramatic. It is about receptors learning. A careful codeine prescription does not equal a ruined future. Many people take a few days of codeine after surgery or a dental procedure, and then stop. The bottle empties, or is returned to the cabinet. Weeks later, they barely remember the brand name, and life moves on in its socks and tea stains. What matters is pattern. How many days, how often, at what dose, for what kind of pain, with what sleep, mood, stress, and other medicines standing nearby. Opioid trouble usually grows through repetition and context, not through a single responsible tablet taken after dinner. Codeine's place in the middle tier partly reflects its practical limits. On its own, it is not the strongest opioid. In combination tablets, acetaminophen often limits how much can be safely taken. In some bodies, it barely converts at all. Those details keep many prescriptions short and many patients safely unimpressed. But a short limit is not the same as no risk. A person who finds codeine merely drying and dull is unlikely to pursue it far. A person who feels distinctly cared for by it may remember more. The drug has not changed. The receptor has not changed. The meeting between them has simply carried more meaning. One clue is what the patient says the medicine fixed. If the answer is only the tooth, the back strain, or the cough, that tends to stay in a medical lane. If the answer quietly widens into sleep, worry, loneliness, or the general burden of being a person, the lane has started merging. Another clue is time. Pain from a known event usually recedes, even if it does so with poor grace. The need for medication often shrinks with it. When the tablets stay important after the tissue should have settled, the reason may be more than the original injury. Refills tell their own small stories. So do early requests. So does the phrase "just in case" multiplied over several weeks. So does a patient who notices exact timings with unusual devotion, or who speaks of a medicine less as a tool and more as a mood with a barcode. Tramadol complicated this picture by pretending to be separate from it. For years, some patients and some prescribers treated it as outside the main opioid narrative. Yet the mu-opioid receptor does not care about branding. If that receptor is being activated regularly, the nervous system may still begin its quiet housekeeping. And tramadol added one more layer. Because it also affects serotonin and norepinephrine, stopping it could feel odd in more than one direction. There could be the familiar opioid absence. There could also be the unsettled feeling that comes when brain message chemicals have been nudged for a while and are asked abruptly to tidy themselves up. That made it a poor candidate for casual experimentation. A person could not simply borrow 2 capsules from a relative and expect a clean little trial. The drug did not remain in its lane. It brought friends. It changed traffic lights. It left the nervous system to explain the bill afterward. The quiet evening shelves seem more serious here. The amber glass is the same. The ledger is still open. Somewhere a drawer closes with a wooden sigh. Yet these medicines ask for a different kind of respect than aspirin ever did, because they can alter both pain and the memory of being comforted. Pain is lonely work, even when treatment is good. A medicine that not only dulls pain but wraps the evening in softness can become appealing for reasons beyond the original complaint. This is not a moral failure. It is a brain doing exactly what brains are built to do. Brains are reward learning machines with excellent note-taking. They remember what reduced suffering. They remember what made sleep easier. They remember what turned a hard day into something smoother around the edges. The mu-opioid receptor, once involved, gives those notes a warmer ink. This is why doctors try to separate pain relief from open-ended comfort. A short course, a clear reason, a defined stop point. Other measures alongside it like rest, ice, time, position, physical therapy, or plain patience. The goal is to use the key without teaching the lock to expect it every evening. Some people cross this shelf and never glance back. Their codeine was a temporary bridge over a rough week. Their tramadol was a brief compromise after another medicine failed. The bridge is used, crossed, and forgotten, like a folding chair returned to the garage after guests have gone home. Others linger. The medicine begins as treatment and stays as company. The original pain may still be real, but the drug now answers more than pain. It answers dread, restlessness, sleeplessness, and the tired wish to have the day stop pressing from all sides. That is how escalation becomes imaginable. A patient who has learned that this receptor can provide both relief and emotional quiet may be more vulnerable to stronger opioids later. The path is not guaranteed. It is not automatic. But the brain now knows the door exists, and knowledge itself changes future choices. Even the word weak opioid can mislead. It sounds comforting, as if weakness cancels family resemblance. In truth, weak often means lower potency, not a different destination. The same receptor is still involved. The same adaptive system is still listening carefully and taking notes in the dark. You can hear a spoon settle against glass in the next room. It is such a small sound. That is how this whole tier behaves at first. Small doses, small bottles, small instructions, quiet labels. The trouble when it comes usually begins with smallness and repetition, not with any theatrical event. This is why codeine and cough syrup needed its own firm warnings. The bottle looked homey, The syrup tasted almost cooperative. A patient could mistake good for coughing for good for ordinary use, which is how many unhelpful habits begin. The sweet taste disguised the fact that the brain was being addressed in a more intimate language. Hospitals learned this in their own practical way. A nurse giving codeine or tramadol does not only ask where the pain is, she asks what else the patient has taken. She asks how sleepy the patient feels. She looks at timing, breathing, age, liver function, and a medication list that resembles a family argument. The questions can seem fussy from the bed. They are not. They are the price of using a receptor system that sits close to comfort, reward, and automatic bodily rhythm. Once a medicine steps into that system, dosing becomes less like seasoning soup and more like tuning a radio with thin gloves on. Even so, a calm and careful use remains possible. That is important to say. Codeine and tramadol are not myths or traps by definition. They have helped many people through painful and temporary stretches. The point is not fear. The point is knowing why this shelf feels fundamentally unlike the earlier ones. At the edge of the counter, Dr. Overconfident returned with a thoughtful expression and a travel pack of antacids. He asked whether tramadol might be, in his words, a smarter route for someone with refined instincts. The pharmacist looked at him for a long moment, then asked which antidepressant, sleep aid, and cold medicine he planned to stop before beginning this adventure. Dr. Overconfident blinked twice. He had not considered that a pain capsule might demand a full census of the bathroom cabinet. He had imagined something much simpler, involving half a tablet, strong tea, and personal confidence. His curiosity folded itself up quite neatly after that. That redirection was dull, sensible, and very useful. This tier punishes improvisation more than the earlier shelves did. A patient can blunder through an extra ibuprofen and learn through indigestion. A patient who improvises here may discover that chemistry keeps deeper records than the stomach does. The room settles again after such moments. The ledger waits. A distant refrigerator hums behind a door. The amber bottles continue their patient silence, each one looking much calmer than the receptor systems they can awaken in blood and brain. Codeine and tramadol spent decades occupying this in-between world. They were familiar enough to seem ordinary, prescribed enough to seem legitimate, and active enough to belong to the opioid family whether the label admitted it or not. They stood between the bathroom cabinet and the locked drawer, translating one world into the next. That middle position fooled many people. It fooled patients who assumed cough syrup could not matter much. It fooled prescribers who trusted less potent to mean unlikely to reshape behavior. It fooled families who recognized the bottle from childhood and forgot that familiarity is one of medicine's most persuasive disguises. If the chapter has a single dim lesson, it is this. Once pain relief works by leaning on the mu-opioid receptor, the question is no longer only how well it numbs. The question becomes what else it teaches the brain to value, remember, and miss. Everything that follows on these shelves grows from that change. So the bottle, the blister, and the plain little mixed tablet sit quietly under the light. They do not look like a threshold. They look like errands and paperwork and a Tuesday night chest cold. Yet this is where the path bends away from simple pain control and toward the stranger territory of reward, tolerance, and dependence. You remain by the counter while the last page of the formulary ledger lifts in the air vent and falls flat again. The smell is paper, syrup, and that clean, faint antiseptic note that never fully leaves the room. Somewhere behind the shelves, stronger names are waiting in smaller doses. For now, though, the first true opioid door has been opened and named, and it is enough to know its shape. On the counter tonight, one small vial seems heavier than its glass should allow. The label says morphine in tidy print. The amber shelf behind it catches a pale line of light from the humming tube above. You can almost feel the caution in the handwriting beside the dose. The ledger lies open with its ruled columns and blunt pencil marks. Even the paper looks as if it has learned to keep its voice down. Morphine sits in medicine like a ruler kept in a top drawer. Other opioid drugs are often compared against it in quiet little sums. Doctors still ask how strong something is by asking how close it stands to morphine. That habit began with a young German chemist named Friedrich Serturner in 1804. He worked with raw opium that looked sticky and brown and faintly plant-like. From that muddy source he pulled out pale crystals and gave pain relief a sharper name. Before that, opium was a broad old mixture. It was resin, gum, tincture, spoon, drop, and guesswork. After Sir Turner, one part of it could be weighed with more certainty on a small brass scale. The change seems modest when told beside a warm counter. It was still powder and bottle and careful fingers. Yet medicine suddenly had a cleaner tool, which is often how large changes first appear. He named it after Morpheus, the god of dreams, which was perhaps a little too neat. Pharmacology has always liked a grand title on a very plain bottle. The bottle, for its part, remains unimpressed. In the years that followed, morphine became easier to carry and easier to measure. Tiny paper packets could hold a real dose. A spoon, a little water, and a record line and a ledger made the day look organized. That order mattered in field hospitals later on. During the American Civil War, medical chests held morphine among bandages, thread, corks, and folded linen. It could be packed, counted, and given with a speed older remedies did not offer. The same was true again in the First World War. A tent, a lantern, a damp blanket, and a metal case could still make room for morphine. In rough places, doctors valued medicines that worked in a known amount. Its use spread because it could be injected as well as swallowed. That matters when a patient cannot keep anything down. It matters when minutes are busy and hands are cold, and a notebook must still be accurate. So morphine became ordinary in the strange way only powerful things can. It appeared in syringes, tablets, ampules, and quiet ward rounds. It settled into hospitals like a stern old standard everyone stopped introducing. That is why it remains the benchmark now. Hospitals still talk about morphine equivalents when they compare opioid strength. A new drug may have its own bright name, but morphine is the measuring stick in the drawer. The measuring itself can feel almost domestic. One tablet equals this many milligrams of morphine. One injection equals that many. A chart on a wall, rather like a baking conversion table, decides how much respect a dose deserves. This part deserves to be told plainly. Last night the mu-opioid receptor was finally named. Tonight the rest of the house comes into view. Morphine and its cousins do not only quiet pain signals, though they do that very well. They also sit on those receptors again and again, day after day. Cells notice repeated company. Cells are patient, but they are not passive. A cell that receives the same opioid signal for long enough starts protecting its balance. It can pull some receptors inward from the surface. It can make the remaining receptors less responsive to the same old message. That is tolerance in its plainest shape. The medicine has not become weaker in the bottle. The body has become harder to impress. So the same dose that once felt large begins to feel ordinary. A tablet that gave warm relief on Monday may barely tidy the edges by Friday. The notebook line rises a little, then a little again. Tolerance is not a personality flaw hiding in chemistry. It is chemistry doing what living tissue always does. It adjusts to a constant signal the way eyes adjust to a lit room. The room metaphor helps because it is gentle. Nothing in the bottle announces this in a dramatic voice. It happens quietly, like curtains thinning in the morning. Withdrawal is the other half of that adjustment. When the drug disappears, the system does not bounce back at once. It has to recalculate after living with the medicine as part of its daily weather. That recalculation feels unpleasant because the balance is off. Nerves fire too freely for a time. The body seems to have misplaced its usual level setting. People describe it in small household terms before they reach for bigger ones. Chills, a stomach that objects to breakfast, a nightshirt that suddenly feels wrong against the skin. The details vary with the drug, the dose, and the length of use, yet the core idea stays simple. The body had adapted to the drug's presence, and now it must adapt to the drug's absence. That is why dependence becomes more than a habit of mind. It becomes a body state with clocks and thresholds. The hours between doses start to matter in a very physical way. Opioids also touch the brain's reward system, which complicates matters further. Relief itself is rewarding, of course, but these drugs can add a separate signal that says this matters, remember this, seek this again. Dopamine is part of that lesson. The brain uses it to tag things as important. Food, comfort, social approval, and drugs all can leave marks there, though not in equal ways. With prolonged opioid exposure, those reward circuits do not simply repeat themselves. Their patterns change. The traffic through them changes. Some of the links between expectation, relief, and craving grow stronger and easier to trigger. Brain scans and tissue studies show measurable shifts after long exposure. Activity changes in the reward network. Structural changes can be seen in the connections themselves. The path becomes easier to walk because it has been walked so often. By that point, dependence is not an abstract warning on a pamphlet. It is a built condition. The person may know exactly what is happening and still feel the pull as a bodily fact. The fluorescent hum seems louder when that part is understood. A white bottle cap under your fingers feels very small. So much of modern medicine lives in such modest plastic. Morphine shows the pattern clearly because it has been studied for so long. It binds strongly at the mu-opioid receptor. It relieves pain, slows the gut, dulls cough, and wraps relief in a heavy kind of comfort. That comfort is part of the trouble. A pain drug that only erased pain would be simpler to manage. Morphine often does more than that, and the brain notices the extra warmth. Doctors still use it because severe pain is real and sometimes demands powerful help. A long surgery, a shattered night of cancer pain, a breathless hospital bed after an injury, all may call for it. Morphine stays because it still works. The bottle beside it, however, may not say morphine at all. It may say oxycodone or hydrocodone in print as cheerful as vitamin labels. The chemistry is related, though the names sound as if they belong to separate cousins. Oxycodone and hydrocodone are both built from the same broad opioid family tree. They are not identical copies of morphine. Small changes in their structure shift how strongly they act, how well they work by mouth, and how doctors use them. A chemist would point to altered oxygen groups and a changed arrangement around the ring. A pharmacist might simply say the skeleton is familiar, but the sleeves have been tailored. The body notices tailoring at this scale. These differences matter because swallowing is the most ordinary way people take medicine. Morphine by mouth can be useful, but it is not always elegant. Oxycodone tends to behave more predictably when taken as a tablet. Hydrocodone has often appeared in combination products, tucked beside acetaminophen like a less welcome roommate. Oxycodone also spent years paired with other drugs before starring on its own labels. The bottles looked domestic enough to sit beside cough drops. That domestic look changed a great deal in the 1990s. A long-acting form of oxycodone, sold as OxyContin, arrived with a polished story. The story said slow release would mean smooth pain control and a low risk of addiction. Sales representatives carried that story into clinics with brochures and practiced calm. Doctors heard that severe pain was undertreated. They heard that a time-release tablet was modern, humane, and unlikely to cause much trouble. The supporting literature for that confidence was thin and far too hopeful. Some of it rested on weak evidence. Some of it stretched brief observations into broad reassurance, which is a habit medicine regrets with unusual regularity. It was, in its way, the original influencer campaign for a lifestyle nobody needed to adopt. Branded pens appeared. Sponsored lunches appeared. The language of risk grew strangely sunny around a drug that deserved shade and caution. Then the decade after that did what decades do. It turned paper claims into lived routine. Prescriptions rose. Medicine cabinets filled. Refill dates began to matter. And entire waiting rooms learned the names by heart. Some patients did exactly what they were told, and still found themselves changed by it. Some doctors prescribed in good faith, and later looked back at their own handwriting with a kind of stunned distance. The bottle had been presented as simpler than it was. Hydrocodone followed its own wide path through ordinary clinics and kitchens. It sat in orange bottles after dental work and back injuries. It arrived with refill conversations, combination tablets, and a tendency to seem less serious than it really was. Oxycodone often felt a little more direct and a little more forceful. Hydrocodone often looked more familiar because it was tucked into mixed tablets. Familiarity is a useful disguise in a pharmacy, which the shelves know better than people do. The pharmacist once watched a patient ask whether 2 opioid prescriptions could be layered like sweaters. He adjusted his glasses and said dosage is not outerwear. And yet people still don't read the label. No one in the room argued. Even Gerald does not interrupt here. The farm remains unmentioned. His famous aspirin speech has finally found a door it cannot open. By now, the distinction between pain relief and dependence risk is no longer mysterious. It sits in the receptor, the reward signal, and the repeated exposure. It sits in the fact that a body can be taught new expectations by relief. The labels still look ordinary, which may be the strangest part. A child-proof cap clicks just like any other cap. The warning sticker is the same angry orange square used for far smaller problems. Hospitals keep another name in a stricter part of the cupboard. Hydromorphone is often known by the brand name Dilaudid. The ampules are small, clear, and handled with the kind of care usually reserved for fine china and tax documents. When the locked drawer opens, it does so with a dry metal sound. A second person often stands nearby for the count. Pens are uncapped, numbers are read aloud, and no one tries to rely on memory. Hydromorphone is significantly more potent than morphine per milligram. A very small amount can do a great deal. That means a decimal point matters here with almost ceremonial seriousness. Its structure is close to morphine's, but not the same. Small chemical changes alter how strongly it activates the receptor. The result is a drug that delivers more opioid effect from less material. That is why hospital doses can look surprisingly tiny on paper. A patient may receive a number that seems almost toy-like beside a morphine dose. The syringe, however, is not impressed by the size of the number. Hospitals reach for hydromorphone in very specific situations. Severe acute pain after major surgery is one. Severe pain that has not responded well to morphine is another. It can also be useful when kidney function is poor. Morphine leaves behind metabolites that can accumulate and complicate matters in those patients. Hydromorphone often fits more neatly into that clinical puzzle, though it is never casual. It may be given by mouth, but hospital staff often know it as an injected medicine. Then the volumes are small, and the timing is exact. A nurse checks the order, the line, the name band, the clock, and the next box on the chart. The strictness around it is not theatrical. It is practical, repeated, and almost boring in its precision. Boring is a treasured quality when a drug is powerful enough to turn tiny errors into large ones. So the dispensary builds small rituals around hydromorphone. Stock is counted at shift change. Partial doses are witnessed when wasted. Every movement of every vial creates a paper trail with enough detail to satisfy a suspicious staircase. The pharmacist performs these rituals with the grim efficiency of a man who has seen too many improvised theories. He locks the drawer, signs the line, and checks the remaining count twice. The drawer receives more respect than certain local officials. Dr. Overconfident has, for the moment, stopped testing his ideas on empty stomachs. His confidence has not vanished, but it now arrives with dry crackers and a quieter face. Experience at last has achieved what labels could not. Hydromorphone also teaches a blunt lesson about potency. Potency is not the same as virtue, or danger alone, or moral weight. It simply means more effect from less drug, which is useful only in very disciplined hands. A higher potency medicine can be exactly the right choice in a monitored bed. It can allow smaller volumes and quick relief. It can also require much tighter attention to timing, counting, and dose conversions. That returns the story to morphine's old role as benchmark. Staff compared doses back to morphine because the common ruler helps prevent confusion. In a busy ward, shared rulers save thought for the parts that truly need it. Morphine equivalent tables, for all their dry appearance, are acts of humility. They admit that names are slippery and milligrams can mislead. 1 milligram is not 1 milligram in any useful universal sense. A strong opioid can therefore be both ordinary and dangerous in a very untheatrical way. It may arrive in a cup with crushed ice chips and a plastic spoon. It may be charted beside blood pressure and breakfast tolerance, without any special flourish. The body, however, keeps making its adjustments beneath that plain surface. Receptors continue to change with repeated exposure. Reward circuits continue to learn, and then to relearn, around the drug's presence. Over weeks and months, the brain becomes less interested in being surprised by the opioid. It starts to treat the drug less like an event, and more like a required condition. That shift is the quiet center of addiction. The old dose stops reaching as far. The interval between doses seems longer. The absence begins to speak louder than the presence, which is a bleak kind of arithmetic no label explains very well. This is why doctors learn to write certain names carefully. They are not merely writing a product and a number. They are setting terms for how a nervous system will spend its next hours and sometimes its next months. The care begins before the ink is dry. Has the patient used opioids before? Is the pain sudden, chronic, surgical, cancer-related, or mixed with anxiety and poor sleep? Is swallowing easy, or is an injection needed, or a patch, or nothing stronger at all? Then come the questions about the body that receives the drug. How old is the patient? How are the kidneys working? How is the breathing? What other sedating medicines are already waiting in the bloodstream, like uninvited dinner guests? Even constipation enters the room because opioids slow the gut with stubborn reliability. Nurses ask about bowel movements in tones that suggest they have long since given up on embarrassment. Medicine is often glamorous only from a great distance. Sleepiness is watched too, though sleepy and safe are not the same. Pinpoint pupils, slowed breathing, missed meals, and a patient drifting too far from conversation can all matter. Much of opioid care is careful noticing. None of this means opioids have no proper place. They plainly do. For some kinds of pain, especially severe acute pain and some cancer pain, they remain humane and useful tools when handled well. But they are not simple tools, which was the illusion sold too easily in the 1990s. A hammer does not rewrite receptor density. An ice pack does not teach the reward system new priorities. With opioids, treatment and risk travel in the same bottle. The dose that relieves can also instruct. The schedule that comforts can also train. That is why extended release forms deserve their own particular caution. The point of a slow-release tablet is steadier drug levels over many hours. Steadier can mean fewer peaks, but it doesn't mean harmless, and it certainly never meant non-addictive. A long-acting oxycodone tablet was marketed as if time itself would behave ethically on the patient's behalf. Time is not that cooperative. It merely spreads exposure across the day, which can be helpful or harmful, depending on everything else. Doctors and pharmacists eventually learned to read that history like bad handwriting. The letters were all there from the start. The page simply looked tidy enough that many people did not stop to squint. The pharmacist says the hardest part was the ordinariness. The bottles arrived with printed instructions and proper seals. Patients stood at the counter holding insurance cards and paper sacks, and nothing in the scene looked like a warning. He says this without drama, while smoothing a bent corner in the ledger. The label will mention drowsiness, constipation, and not driving. It doesn't mention receptor downregulation, reward circuitry, or a month quietly rearranging itself around refill day. For a moment he seems almost tired on behalf of everyone involved. Then he closes the book and adds that none of the important part ever fits on the label, and yet people still don't read the label. The room accepts this as both joke and fact. There is still no sound from Gerald. Not even the farm can help here. Aspirin has wisely stayed in its own chapter. If you look across the shelves now, the spectrum of pain relief feels narrower and steeper. The distance from a bathroom tablet to a hospital opioid is not measured only in strength. It is measured in what repeated use teaches the body to expect. Morphine stands in the center as the old reference point. Oxycodone and hydrocodone show how small structural changes can become large public stories. Hydromorphone waits farther in, where milligrams shrink and supervision grows stricter. And beneath all of them sits the same receptor logic. Relief, repetition, adaptation, absence, and learned importance. Those are the 5 quiet pieces that turn a medicine into a dependence risk. The pharmacy has gone a little dimmer while this has been said. The antiseptic smell is still there under the wood and paper. A cork settles somewhere on a shelf with a soft, private knock. You can almost imagine how many hands have reached for these names over 2 centuries. Some hands were gloved, some were ink-stained, some belonged to very tired doctors at very ordinary desks. Each hand met the same paradox. Here was a substance able to lift terrible pain with astonishing grace. Here also was a substance able to persuade the body that its presence had become necessary. Medicine keeps both truths in view as best it can. That is why the writing becomes careful. That is why the locks click shut. And that is why these names are spoken so softly here, beside amber glass and a ledger line. They are not forbidden names. They are simply names that have earned a quieter kind of respect. It is pleasant to remember the moment the scale became almost too strange to hold. Fentanyl was already far stronger than morphine, and still its proper medical dose could sit on a counter without the eye quite finding it. Then the numbers slipped further from ordinary sense. Carfentanil belonged to the world of very large wildlife, and its grain of salt danger made the formulary ledger feel suddenly small. There was also that bright, locked corner of the hospital shelf. Sufentanil and remifentanil lived there, in the careful world of anesthesia, where effect could be counted in minutes, and nothing at all was left to guesswork. And the quietest turn came last. Methadone took the same receptor that shorter opioids had unsettled, held it steadily, and made the whole long ranking feel less like a cliff and more like a circle. Now the shelves can blur a little at the edges, and the last facts can settle like dust in warm light. The night feels heavier in the kindest way, and the mind no longer needs to hold every number. Somewhere in that hush, Gerald has offered his single sleepy word of ground, and it was, at last, fair. May your dreams be free of label-reading anxiety and the nagging suspicion that you are taking ibuprofen on an empty stomach. May your night be undisturbed by Gerald's opinions on the correct and universal role of aspirin in modern pharmacological practice. May your sleep be mercifully free of Dr. Overconfident's latest online research findings. Thank you for listening. Keep your thoughts easy, and good night.